Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Velero community meeting for March 30th, 2021. As always, the HackMD is in the chat transcription for the agenda items today. And I'll go ahead and share that window of my screen. All right, so we will, is that still visible for folks?
Yep,
Cool.
I can see the agenda.
Cool, thanks. All right, so we will start with status updates. Carlicia.
Let's see. So I made I worked on uninstall feature. So I just made it a little bit more, more robust because you would like I talked about this last week, but last week I had made a PR that had a bunch of different types of changes together, and Dave was smart to ask me to separate things. So I separated just the uninstall. That's that PR. Basically, it wasn't uninstalling everything. At the first error was just return, which would potentially leave stuff behind. So I fixed that, and I may have better warnings for the user. And the reason why I even got to work on that, and I figured I noticed that because I have been running into a problem with AWS, and it's really bizarre. So basically, most of the time, like 90% of the time, I can't install Velero on AWS. And I can't run the E2E tests because they also require installing Velero. So nobody else is getting this problem. I don't know. I do have an issue that I described what it is, and I have some logging errors there. The errors that I'm getting is basically I'm getting a timeout when so Velero goes through this tries to install the CRDs, and it's always in the same order. So installs the backup storage location, and then when it gets to the delete request, it gets a timeout. It's always like this. It's always on the delete request, times out, arrows out, stops installing.
Have you tried to apply the delete request CRD itself by hand?
Yeah, it works. If I use Cube Control to install it by hand, it works. I have, so no. So anyway, this is happening with the RC as well. So it's not an issue with my building the binary on my local machine, but Dave's theory is that it's a network issue. So anyway, I don't know what to go
Have you
with.
tried with like a previous release, like an official release, rather than building it off of?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I tried it with what? Yeah, I added that data point to the tickets because that's a very good test. At any rate, so last week I spent a ton of time on this because at first I thought that the uninstall leaving things behind, and there's also I also note I was just looking for what could have been causing this in the code. So I noticed the uninstall problem. I noticed that our E2E tests are leaving things behind, but that's not a big issue. As long as the test passes, it's fine. But if there is a problem in the middle of the test, then the tests are not cleaning up artifacts that it creates. So I have an issue for that. I'll address it later. So I just thought that those were the things, and I just started adding code to fix it. But then, so this is intermittent, and this is why it makes it even worse. Sometimes it works. So I made all these changes, and it worked. And I thought, okay, this is one of these changes fixed the problem. Great, let's move on. and then it started happening again. And then so I pulled the branch with my changes, ran in, it was happening again. So none of those issues that I thought were the issues causing this had any relation. So I'm saying I spent a lot of time chasing this last week.
I wonder if it'll help to have at least the API groups end-to-end tests be simplified. I have a separate PR for that just gets rid of a bunch of controllers. It gets rid of the cert manager. And if there's less to delete, do you think that would maybe help with that? If so, I could maybe work on that.
No, I mean, this should not be happening.
This is so Frankie, thank you for your offer. It's hard, Dave. This is
Yeah.
completely unrelated.
Oh, okay.
It's completely unrelated because I've run into this problem in all kinds of ways, and the tests have nothing to do with it.
Oh, interesting.
So to answer your question though, it really doesn't matter how many things are there. We are gonna have to have a cleanup function that we put into all of the returns. So it cleans up before returning. So if there's like 10 or 1, doesn't matter. We're gonna have to do that. So it's your call if things need to be removed, but it doesn't change the fact that we need to clean up. And it's not just like the API group, the Kibishi tests also have things that don't get removed. So it's just something we weren't looking into. It's not a big deal.
So I think I think it's showing up enough. And the weird thing is it's always showing up in the same place. Like you say, you've switched binaries. So I think we need to start basically bisecting things so we can narrow down what's causing this. And my network theory, I'd forgotten that it always happens at the same CRD. So if it was happening at random CRDs, I'd blame your network. But because it's happening at the same CRD relatively consistently, I think it's something else. So this reproduces sometimes if you use the Velero install command, right? Not just the test.
So sometimes it stops happening and everything works. No, I'm just going over things. Yep. And then when the error starts happening, it happens for both the install and the tests. So
what I'm thinking is we could, for example, write a simple script that just does install, uninstall repeatedly and see if that starts to reproduce the problem on your machine.
On my machine?
Yeah, because your machine's showing the problem right now. So we make this script that just
think the answer to that is yes, it's gonna reproduce.
But let's make a simple script that just uses like the stock install, uninstall, run that, it shows the problem after half an hour. We'll take that same script, we'll run it from like my either Mac or my Linux machine against the same cluster and see if we can repro it. If we can repro it in 2 places easily, then we can start nailing things down. And I want to try things like, for example, if we do all the CRD installs with kubectl versus the installer, does it work, does it not work? So we start to bisect and start to figure out what is the problem here. Is it the cluster? I think the cluster, we've seen that the cluster works for other people. Like I've been able to use that same cluster, do things immediately after you're having the problem, but maybe it isn't the cluster. We don't know because it's intermittent.
Yeah, so another data point for people who don't know is we use 2 different clusters to run this on. I got the problem, both clusters. Dave didn't get the problem. Well, I used Dave's cluster, so I got the problem on his cluster. He didn't try my cluster, but we should do that from different machines against the same cluster. That's a good test.
Yeah, we can try a simple loop that just does like install and uninstall.
Yeah.
And if that starts showing up after 3rd or 5th or whatever iteration, then it's like, okay, so then I can run it. If it runs for like 2 hours on my machine, we can start to say, well, it's probably not Linux, it's probably not Mac, whatever it is. We start to try and bisect and reproduce.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah. Okay, so it sounds like you might have a path forward on that.
Yeah.
So cool. So it looks like we have 2 more.
Yeah. So I'll do the script. We do have to do same for the RC, and that's what I'm going to be working on. That's it. Oh, and I'm on community support today, this week. That's it for me.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, so mainly released up, excuse me, last week. So ED tests are with the volume snapshots. Those are running versus vSphere, AWS, and I got Azure running last night. Mainly config things, so no real actual problems. So yeah, so we're doing good there, and that's pretty much it for me.
Cool. And I forgot to ask, any questions for Carlisi or Dave? Going once, going twice. Okay, Bridget.
Hi, everyone. So main announcement for me is that yesterday we got, I went through the release process and we now have an RC candidate available for 1.6. Yeah, my week has mostly just been spent going through the last steps and getting that out. So that's what we're going to be using now as a team for the testing before we get the official release out. I don't really have a huge amount to add other than that, but if you want to try it out, please feel free and give us feedback. It would be super helpful, but we'll also be testing it.
Yep, thanks for getting that out. And yeah, I'd like us, as we run tests, we all use the same one. We all use the same thing, same artifact. And that way we can actually trace down issues. So yeah, thanks for getting this out. Any questions for Bridget?
I have one more thing I forgot to add to my list. I still have to cut the plugin releases. I built the images, but the workflow I had is I would test the new images with the RC and then cut the releases. If this is not right, somebody let me know, but that's what I was going with. So if someone wants, so I don't know what to do with this AWS issue as far as cutting the release for the plugins.
Well, let's put that on hold and figure it out before we cut a release for the AWS plugin.
Yeah.
I think, and we can address that separately.
Yeah.
Yeah, those will need to be updated for the BSL changes that came with the secrets, but I guess let's make sure it's not in core Velero, the issue you're having, before we cut anything or anything more. For my update, I've been out for several weeks, so I'm catching up. I'm gonna grab doing some manual testing there. I don't have the issue here, but I'll link it. There's an issue with the manual steps that we should all be running. I'm gonna run that against GCP to verify all those work. And otherwise been catching up on emails and things. One thing I will mention here, Carlisia and I will be at KubeCon EU with Dylan Murray from Red Hat, talking about data protection in a birds of a feather session. We have a date for that, but it's escaping me at the moment. I think May 8th or something. But we'll get those into the weekly updates and let people know. So not a whole lot from me. Ashish.
For me, I've just been running tests on the RC to make sure stuff is working. Mainly focusing on Restic stuff because I did the upgrade. Yeah, so far things have been good. I want to run the same test that I've been running on like AWS to make sure it works. Carlisi, I'm happy to pair with you on investigating what is causing your issue. Let me know if you need help.
Cool. Thank you for testing the Rustic upgrades. That's super important. Any questions for Ashish? Okay, Eleanor.
Hello. I think I've met nearly everyone on the call, but I'll just say I'm Eleanor. I'm the new product manager for Velero. I'm from VMware. This is the beginning of my 3rd week on the project, so I'm still ramping up a lot. My 2 main focuses, and I just thought I'd give a very quick product update. Just so you know that my 2 focuses are the Velero vision and roadmap. I believe that there is currently a 1.7 roadmap, but I'm hoping to help create a longer term roadmap, say for the next year. Right now, for the past 2.5 weeks, I've been focusing on the vision. I've been working especially with Dave, but others also familiar with Velero, to define major problems facing Velero, possible solutions, or sorry, major problems facing Velero users, pardon me, not Velero, possible solutions to those, and then evaluating the benefits of those possible solutions for the Velero community. My next step is to circulate this product grid that I've been using to contain these thoughts with Velero community members. And I'm also hoping to do user interviews to really validate a bunch of assumptions in this product grid. From that, we'll form the vision. And then once we have the vision, then we can define initiatives, epics, prioritize features, and build that longer term roadmap. So hopefully in the coming community meetings, I'll be able to share learnings as I go. So that's it for me.
Cool. Any questions for Eleanor? All right, moving on to the discussion topics. Not being here last week, were there any discussion topics last week that we need to circle back on? I'm gonna scroll down here. I don't see any.
I think last week's meeting was very short.
Okay.
So
Cool.
I don't think there were any discussion topics that came up.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of people have been heads down on the release and really focused on that. So some other stuff has slowed down. Okay, Frankie and Raphael.
All right. So this discussion topic, I was wondering, and this is kind of a hard question to ask because it's kind of asking how hard is something, and it's like, I wanted to say, is it possible to do something? But of course, everything's possible. So now I'm asking, I'm going to change it to how hard will it be? But you know how we have to install, in order to do a backup and restore with Velero, you have to install Velero on the source cluster. You have to install Velero on the destination cluster. And we were thinking, how much work would it be to maybe use Velero as a library? So basically pull in packages, import them just like a library from a binary that works remotely. So maybe you install Velero on cluster, a service cluster that's not the source cluster, not the destination cluster, so a service cluster, and then you start pulling items from the source cluster, saving it into a BSL, backup storage location, and then push those items to the target cluster or destination cluster from that BSL. I'm not sure if this is something if the maintainers can answer off the top of their heads, but what are your initial thoughts or questions as to maybe why the heck we would want to do this? You could ask that too.
Yeah, so for the service cluster, I have 2 points there. So the first is you actually could do that with Kubernetes objects by passing the right kube configs. However, Velero makes a lot of assumptions that it's living in one cluster and not doing, multiple. So you have to have a kube config pointed at the original, the source, and then you'd have to swap it to kube config pointed at the destination. That's doable. It's just kind of clunky right now. The second thing is volume snapshots and Restic would not work that way right now, today, because the volume snapshots would assume you're in, it assumes it's in the same cluster, especially Restic. Although I think the volume snapshotters could work if it was like a public cloud, because they would send the calls to the cloud API for that region in the nodes, but rustic wouldn't work because it requires local node access. So I think that stuff's doable, and Dave has an architecture model that would service some of this. Going to the other question for backup and importing backup and restore packages. Right now, you could import them, but I think backup and is it backup or restore? One of the two is heavily interwound with or interwoven with the controller. I think it's restore. So it's doable, but what we'd like to do is basically clean up that tech debt to move that logic that's in the controller into the restore library and get closer to this.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So there's an issue out there, and it's pretty old. Mostly we've put it on the back burner because stuff works today. But yeah, it's doable, and you have a cleanup.
Yeah, we'll be happy to take a look there.
Okay.
Just to bring everybody the rationale for this problem / opportunity, whatever you want to call it. If you want to migrate from legacy clusters to a new cluster, it is getting more and more difficult to install Velero on those legacy clusters. And if we add this capability to have Velero running on a service cluster and make the connection to the source cluster over a client Go. And I know about disks. Let's say for the sake of this, is always stateless. I don't care about disks. I'll argue that will be the low hanging fruit for this.
Sure.
To solve this problem for now.
I was just going to say that sounds like it would help our use case as well, because we're using it for migration. We're currently installing Velero on older clusters, but modifying the CRDs to remove those validation bits that fail. But of course, that puts us in other areas of the code, which are, they currently work for us, but we know they're unsupported on those clusters. And so that this would help us get away from that. Because we're trying, because we were helping customers migrate from, clusters from Kubernetes, say, 1.7 through 1.11 up to newer clusters.
Scott, are they doing that all in one go, or are they doing like incremental stops in between?
So right now, our basic migration approach is that we create a migration CR with our an MTC product, and then basically we do a Velero backup, and we are doing two-phase backup, so that we do a kind of our OpenShift image streams plus the PV and PVC data in one backup, and then we do a separate backup of everything else, just so that we can do incremental image and PV backup without shutting down applications for those that can do that. And then we do the final backup at the end. And then we move over to the destination cluster where the same backup storage location is registered. And then we do a restore over there.
Yeah. Okay. So let us know the ticket. We can talk offline or over the Kubernetes Slack, but I'll be more than happy to have me and Frankie looking at this and talk to Eleanor and everybody here to see if it makes sense to put on the roadmap.
I'm super interested in what Dave has to say.
Yeah, can I get a word in edgewise, please?
Yeah.
So I've done some of this. So I was actually able to, there's a POC where we use the backupper as a library. I hadn't actually gotten around to restore yet, so I hadn't run into that problem. I think we do want to take this as a case for our general overall use cases. So we've been looking at, splitting out a lot of places into the infra layer. And I think this is another driver, is the migration use case, and being able to build eventually like migration utilities, which are specifically for upgrades or cluster to, specifically these upgrades or import situations, and being able to use the infra layer independently of Velero, the application, I think is going to be important here. And yeah, if we can include as a library sometimes, because a lot of these things, minus the volumes, there's really no reason why we need to be running in the cluster.
Yeah.
And even for things like, like AWS or even vSphere, if you have the credentials and you can look into the cluster, you can talk directly to the storage system. Restic, we need a pod running in there, and some of the other stuff we're going to need a pod running in there. But yeah.
Wow, that's great news. And Dave, is your work published somewhere that we can look at, or even the architecture?
There's a branch in Astrolabe, so
Mhm.
we can take a look at it if you like. So
Awesome.
catch up with me. We need to start merging that stuff back into the mainstream of Astrolabe, but we have a bunch of other stuff going on.
Sweet. Okay, cool. Raphael and I will set up a meeting with you, Dave.
I have one more question about the security aspect. So what are the security concerns that folks are having? Raphael and Frankie.
Oh, okay. So for this gonna solve one security concern, which is connecting a legacy cluster to an object storage that not necessarily gonna be on-prem or off-prem. So that means that you're open up a legacy cluster in production to connect to a source using a credential that's a security problem we are solving. Now, of course, you need to make the trust between a service cluster to this legacy cluster over the kubeadmin. But if we make that a secret, if we put some mitigation for that trust, one mitigation is, passwords, or even there's another thing that we would like to solve in this problem. If we have an object storage only that service cluster only talks to that object storage, nobody else, not even the source or destination cluster, because that's one of the problems I had back at Citigroup using Velero. The moment that you take a backup of Velero, you have your secrets on a disk, right? Then I had to encrypt that disk.
There's no need for it to go to object storage. That's an artifact of the way Velero works, but there's no need for it to go to object storage. The amount of data you're moving is, small gigabytes. We can keep that on a local disk.
So there we go. That's something that's another part of the thing that we like to solve, is avoid altogether object storage, because if you talk about migration, is a one-time action, right? It's not a data protection.
So the Astrolabe architecture, you would have two repositories. One would be your source Kubernetes, one would be your destination, and you would just copy the Kubernetes metadata between the two directly.
Yeah. So what are you saying, that can we do this today?
Well, if we could get the restore working, we could at least do a POC, but we'll probably have to work through the restore issues. And maybe that's something we put on the 1.7 roadmap, or at least we get a POC working where we untease that. It's probably not that, it can't be that bad, right?
Okay.
Well.
Okay.
I like hearing that. That's optimistic.
But if you keep the backup on local storage, then maybe that local storage can be something that is backed by MinIO, and then you can initiate the restore that way. You don't.
Yeah, but I really want to, there's no point. So we want to build towards the point where on these migration use cases, we don't need to take a hop through an object store. That's just an extra copy. So that's the direction we want to go in any case. So getting it done would be great.
Yeah, I get that. But for restore to work, you need to have a backup, which has to, in current situation, the backup has to be in a backup storage location.
Yeah, but we want to change that. But if it's this BSL, it's a local disk on my service cluster, nobody is not exposed to anywhere, I'm solving the security problem was mentioned before, which is to do a copy and paste. I'm still kind of like I'm persisting this data somewhere that potentially can be readable at rest by somebody else.
Yeah, I think what we will need is like restore from not just a backup, but a tarball.
Well, so the idea here is to take this whole thing outside of Velero, where it's no longer a Velero backup and to restore. that we really have a migration utility that's using like our Kubernetes serializer to serialize and deserialize. And there's really even no need for local storage. They should be piped together if you're doing it right in the moment.
Yeah, that would be the ideal situation. Just
Yeah,
have
so-
have everything streamed from memory.
Because why are you storing it? You didn't care, right?
Right. Exactly.
It effectively comes down to a bunch of kubectl gets piped into
Exactly.
kubectl apply,
Mhm.
with maybe fancy manipulation in between in the pipeline.
But with all the beauty that Velero gives about the dependency of the objects, the three objects, and
Right.
and so on, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that would be a good POC for us to work on. Maybe we can collaborate a bit on getting that restore part working in the Astrolabe code.
Yeah,
And,
definitely. I'm definitely willing to put in some time into that.
yeah, that'd be cool.
'Cause
So
yeah. All right, I'll set up a meeting. Thank you so much for this discussion. It went much better than I thought. I mean, it's pretty much all done. Dave, you got it all done except for the restore.
well,
restore
except for the
portion.
work part.
Oh, okay. I'll help with that. I don't know. I feel like 50% is probably the vision and the planning, and then the last part is execution.
Small matter of programming, right?
Yes. Big, small matter.
Okay. Anything more on that topic?
Nope, not from me.
Okay. Carlicia.
Yeah, so I did this checklist because I was trying to keep track of things myself. For me, like what do I need to do? What have I done? What do I still have left over to do? Then I figure maybe we should be doing this. I don't think this list is it's definitely not accurate. For example, I started having questions. Do we have a smaller set of tests that we want to run before the actual release, and then a bigger set of tests that we run after the release, or do we run this, like, would they be the same? Anyway, but
What do you mean after the release? You mean after the RC's cut, or?
no. So there's the RC, and then
Mhm.
there is the release, and then there will be betas in between. What are the sets of tests that we want to run? I think if we list it out, like, because what we do is, okay, let's run this manual test, but I have a hard time keeping track of things unless I have a checklist for myself. And I'm wondering if it's the same case for all of us. I don't know. But my question is, so when we did the RC, you specified a list of, like, these are the tests that are to before the RC is cut. So when they all pass, then we cut the RC. So now we do this other set of tests for after the RC. So that part is I nailed because I basically just copied what you instructed. So I'm having the same questions for the Velero, for the actual release. Do we want, because I know what the whole entire, like the full set of tests is. My question is, do we run that after the release and before the release?
Before.
And what do we do for the beta releases? You know what I mean? It's like, do we run I'm just having these questions that I don't know the answer to.
Okay, so the reason I had like a subset of tests for a release candidate is because these are tests that we can run pretty much mechanically. And if we're iterating, which is what we should be doing until we get to the release candidate, we can quickly run these tests again. So I didn't want us to, for example, run all the manual tests on the release candidate, because that basically consumes the team for a week.
Yeah.
So that's impractical. So what I wanted to do was, and so what we should be doing is the release candidate should be as close to final as possible. And I'm not sure where betas fit in this. Betas actually should be before the release candidate. So I don't think we're doing betas this go round. So betas are a chance for people in the field. People in the field should be able to have a chance to run the code that we think is pretty good and come up with issues that aren't being caught like through our formal testing and real world scenarios. So by the time we get to release to the RC, we should have a lot of confidence that it's just going to pass and move forward. And by the time we cut the release, every test that we can think of to do that we think we should do should have been performed, should have passed. Or if we catch a bug, we make a decision on the bug. Is this a release blocker or not? Sometimes there's things you say, yeah, there's a typo in the docs. Okay, we're going to live with that. So so where we're at right now is the release candidate has a limited set of tests just because those are practical to run frequently.
No,
The-
so that makes complete, like, I think that's very sensible. So let's say we cut the release, we still testing the release candidate. So let's say we know what set of tests to do for this point. So let's say, okay, 2 weeks from now, we are going to prepare to do the actual release. What tests do we run before cutting the release, and what it might be zero, because I just don't have, I don't know the answer.
It's all
And
the
what
tests we've
tests
been
do we
running all the
run?
way.
So right
After.
now the release candidate is a frozen set of bits. So there are going to be no more release candidate builds for RC1. So RC1 is done. If it passes all the tests, then RC1 gets promoted to being 160. If we find bugs in RC1 that we need to fix, we cut a new build and we go back to the beginning and we redo our test cycle. So by the time we get to the end of the test cycle, we've done all of our tests that we can think of against the release candidate bits. There are no changes in those bits, and then they get marked as released. Make sense?
I will.
So there is no
rewatch this
post-release.
bit.
So the only change from RC1, given that it passes all the tests, is the exact set of bits that we're going to release as 160. So there is no release except the tags going to change.
So only if there is a bug.
Then we go back that we say we have to
Okay.
fix for the release. Then we go
Okay.
back and we fix it, and that becomes RC2. And
I
whatever,
have
you
to
know.
look at that document that you wrote, like the criteria. I think that's in the criteria, right?
Yeah, there might be. I mean, we can definitely tune the
Yeah,
verbiage. If it
okay.
doesn't, if it's not clear there, let's fix it. But that
Yeah.
would be the intent. Is
Okay, cool.
RC is a release candidate. So that means that those bits we think are good enough to release. We're going to do our final set of tests on them. If we find anything that says bad, then we start over. We fix those bugs. We make a new release candidate and start from the beginning.
Yeah. So that's one of the questions. The other question is, the main question is it useful for us to have this checklist?
The checklist is good. I think we need to expand a little bit in terms of what exactly we're testing, but I don't want to get too crazy in that. I was asking that we record our sessions. So I started a page, it's internal at the moment. I started a page with like test logs that show this is the test we ran, this is the output of the tests. And so as we do our manual testing, I'd like to ask the people, record their sessions and just put that in as their log of how they passed. And that'll be a record for ourselves to say, yes, we really did it. And also we can refer back to it. If, for example, a bug slips through, we can go back, we can say, hey, what was the test steps that we took? Oh, that wasn't the right thing. And we can also start to convert the manual tests into automated tests, and we can look at our records of how we did it. So this is good as a high level. I think this is good as keeping track of the project, of where we're at. And we should have more detailed stuff.
Right.
But I don't want to spend a lot of time right now writing in detail each step we should take. But I think if we record what we did, that's probably good enough. And then we can take that and either make it into a detailed document for the next release, or ideally we make it into an automated test.
All right, cool.
Cool. Anything more on this subject? Okay. So there's no contributor shout outs or PRs. We've kind of slowed down the merge rate, basically frozen it. If we find bugs, or if you find a bug, please submit it for the RC, and we will evaluate it and see if we need to cut a new one, or what we need to do. For the contributor shout outs on the Q&A, Carlicia, it looks like we don't have any.
That is correct. We don't have any.
Okay. Just reminding folks, the discussions page is super useful, and we ask that people ask Q&A type questions in the community support Q&A GitHub question, GitHub discussion section. All right. Any final subjects for the meeting? All right. Well, then thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good one. Bye.